Okay, hello and good afternoon. In today's class, we will be learning about India's relations with Southeast Asia. We are broadly in the Pacific. We are broadly in the Indo-Pacific, as we had started yesterday by understanding what Indo-Pacific means. So today, as part of the Indo-Pacific, the first level of relation that we start looking at is Southeast Asia. So this is the region that we are talking about. This is Southeast Asia. So if you could see, Southeast Asia could be described in terms of its orientation to comprise two kinds of countries. One, we can call countries of continental Southeast Asia, countries which are present majorly on the land mass. And then two, we can talk about countries which are part of what can be called maritime Southeast Asia. So these countries then, which are majorly island countries, archipelagic countries, can be considered to be part of maritime Southeast Asia, meaning continental Southeast Asia and maritime Southeast Asia, depending on which countries we are talking about. But this entire region is referred to as Southeast Asia. Now let's look at Southeast Asia. So Myanmar, here is Myanmar. If you could see on the map, Myanmar is called India's gateway to Southeast Asia. It is India's gateway to Southeast Asia for one reason, that it is the only Southeast Asian country with which India shares a land border. All right. So this is India's gateway to Southeast Asia. Now Myanmar is also important because India is building a project which is called Kaladan. Multimodal project. All right. So Kaladan multimodal project aims to create, as the name suggests, a multimodal connectivity network involving India and Myanmar. All right. So from port to port, so Sittwe port is here, which we are building. Sittwe port we are building in Myanmar as part of the Kaladan multimodal project. And then apart from Sittwe port, the port infrastructure, what we are also building is an inland water way in the Kaladan river. All right. So that's why multimodal. Maritime connectivity, inland water connectivity, plus a road. All right. So this is one thing. And then there is another road that we are building connecting Thailand, Myanmar and India. All right. So this is the Asian trilateral highway. Both of them are not complete. Both of them are expected to be completed by 2023. All right. So this is basically where Myanmar figures in terms of connectivity, in terms of shared borders. It's a gateway to Southeast Asia for us. And then in the management of borders, all right, this country is important because we share a land border with it. Across which states in India you will find a border with Myanmar? Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram. All right. So this is where you have instances of insurgency. So management of insurgency makes Myanmar a valuable partner for us, because many of the insurgent groups have either sympathies or have their activities in Myanmar side of the border as well. So management of insurgency. So for example, in 2019, India and Myanmar had conducted what they called Operation Sunshine. All right. So that was a counter-insurgency operation across the borders. And then Myanmar is also important because India has invested more than $2 billion as development assistance in Myanmar. All right, $2 billion of development assistance, including for the Kaladan multimodal project, for part of the Asian Trilateral Highway project passing through Myanmar. So all these factors make Myanmar important. But Myanmar is also important because it is a bordering country with China. So this is China. This is Kunming, where China had organized the Indian Ocean, China-Indian Ocean Region Development Conference. So Kunming is the capital of Yunnan province. So first of all, it shares borders with China, and then China is also invested in Myanmar as a neighbor. So it has also built a port called Kaik Phu, just south of the Sittwe port, the Kaik Phu port of China. And all remember, this is Indian Ocean as well as Indo-Pacific. So this is what makes Myanmar important. Now let's look at some rivers, because UPSC asks questions about rivers. This is the Irrawaddy. So Irrawaddy is the lifeline of Myanmar, and Irrawaddy originates in China, it flows through Myanmar, and then it enters into the Bay of Bengal, which is the Andaman Sea. This is the Andaman Sea here, right? And here you have the Cocoa Channel, right? So yesterday I told you in the Indian Ocean, the Cocoa Islands, which are part of Andaman, part of Myanmar, right? And then if you see even Andaman Nicobar is part of submerged mountain chain, Arakan Yoma, which is in Myanmar. So Myanmar shares a border with India, it shares a border with Bangladesh, all right, it shares a border with Thailand, it shares a border with China, and it shares a border with Laos, all right. So these are the bordering countries, neighboring countries of Myanmar: India, Thailand, China, Laos, and then you also have India and Myanmar sharing a maritime boundary, all right, maritime boundary here in the Bay of Bengal, right. Now moving away from Myanmar, you have countries like Laos. So Laos is a landlocked country. Laos, the capital of Laos is Vientiane, all right. The capital of Myanmar traditionally has been Yangon, but its new administrative capital has been built at Naypyidaw, all right. So this is Yangon or Rangoon, this is Naypyidaw. Vientiane, capital of Laos. Laos is a landlocked country. So Laos is surrounded by Myanmar, China, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand, all right. And together Thailand, Laos, Myanmar, they are called the Golden Triangle of Drug Trafficking, all right, Golden Triangle of Drug Trafficking. Now moving beyond Laos, you have Thailand, a large country of Southeast Asia. The capital is Bangkok. It is another maritime neighbor of India in the Andaman Sea, all right. We don't have a land border with Thailand, but a maritime border. Thailand shares borders with Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, and Malaysia, all right, the Malay Peninsula. This is Thailand. Now this is the Gulf of Thailand. Gulf of Thailand is surrounded by Thailand, and on the other side Cambodia, and also the territory of Vietnam, right. Now let's talk about some other rivers which are important. So this is the Mekong River, all right, Mekong River. So Mekong River originates in China, then it makes the border between Thailand and Myanmar. So it Thailand and Myanmar, and then also Laos and Myanmar. It flows through Laos, and then it makes the border between Laos and Thailand, and then it flows into Cambodia, and then it empties into South China Sea. All right, so Mekong, another regional river, it empties into the South China Sea. And then there is another important river, lesser talked about as compared to Irrawaddy and Mekong. This is the Salween River. All right, another important river, the Salween River. So the Salween River originates in China, enters into Myanmar, flows through Myanmar, makes a border between Thailand and Myanmar, and then it also enters into the Andaman Sea. So these are three important rivers that you should remember. Now going beyond Thailand, we have Cambodia. So Cambodia's capital is Phnom Penh. This is the capital of Cambodia, Phnom Penh. So Cambodia is surrounded by Thailand, Laos, this is Vietnam, and it has a coast in the Gulf of Thailand. So these are majorly the countries of continental Southeast Asia, and this then is Vietnam. It is part of the continental Southeast Asia, where it is a large coastline in South China Sea. All right, this is the South China Sea. So it has a large coastline, Vietnam, and its capital is Hanoi. All right, Hanoi is the capital of Vietnam. This is the Gulf of Tonkin, an important location in the context of the Vietnam War. All right, and this is the Hainan Island of China. So Vietnam shares a border with China, with Laos, with Cambodia, and it has a coastline in South China Sea. Right, and then at the tip of continental Southeast Asia is Malay Peninsula. So this is the Malay Peninsula. On the north of it is Thailand, and at the tip of Malay Peninsula is the country of Singapore. So this is Singapore. This is the capital of Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, and if you see, Singapore and Kuala Lumpur are close to the Strait of Malacca. All right, so they are important capital cities, but they are close to an important geographical feature. This is Strait of Malacca, which connects the Andaman Sea, Bay of Bengal, with South China Sea or Pacific in general. Right, now this is another important maritime country of Southeast Asia, Indonesia. So Indonesia is an archipelagic country. It's spread across various islands. Its closest island to India is the Sumatran island. This is Sumatra. All right, and this is the Great Channel. Great Channel separates Sumatra from Nicobar. All right, or Andaman Nicobar. So this is Great Channel. It's an important shipping channel. It is also known as the 6-degree channel. All right, 6-degree channel between Sumatra and Nicobar, also known as Great Channel. This is the 10-degree channel. 10-degree channel separates, and UPSC has asked a question, 10-degree channel separates Andaman Islands from Nicobar Islands. Now, when we move forward, apart from Sumatra, we have the island of Java next to Sumatra. On the island of Java, you have the capital Jakarta, and between Sumatra and Java is the Sunda Strait. All right, Sunda Strait. Now, beyond Java, there is a small island of Bali. All right, Bali. Bali is important because while Indonesia is a Muslim majority country, Bali has a thriving Hindu culture and population. So then you have the island of Timor. There are other smaller islands, right? But we are talking about now an island which has an important feature. So one part of Timor, East Timor, is an independent country. Another part of Timor is controlled by Indonesia. All right. Now this is another island of Borneo. One part of it is Indonesia, one part of it is Malaysia, and at the tip of it is Brunei. So this is another country of Southeast Asia, Brunei, with the capital Bandar Seri Begawan. All right, and then you have the island of Sulawesi, which is an Indonesian island, and then you have the island of New Guinea. So one part of it is country of Papua New Guinea, another part of it is part of Indonesia. So this is Indonesia. And then we have already talked about Brunei. This is Philippines, another completely maritime country of Southeast Asia. So this is the Luzon island of Philippines, and this is, apart from the Mindanao island, among the two of the largest island. So on the Luzon island you have the capital Manila, all right, and then you can see that Southeast Asia surrounds the South China Sea apart from China, right. So South China Sea is surrounded by countries of Southeast Asia plus China, right. So we'll go towards Southeast Asia and South China Sea. So in South China Sea, two important features which are talked about are Paracel Islands, all right. So to the north is Paracel Islands, right, and to the south is Spratly Islands. These are two important features of South China Sea, all right. If you don't remember anything, try to remember a few things out of this. And if you look at question paper, you will find UPSC asks a lot of location based question from this region, simple location based question, all right. So after understanding Southeast Asia through the map, we go and try and understand India Southeast Asia relations, all right. So that's basically what we will be doing today. So now if you look at India Southeast Asia, what we understand is it is part of India's extended neighborhood mainly. But if you look at some countries, they are also immediate land based and maritime neighbors, land based and maritime neighbors, all right. Myanmar is a land based neighbor, and Myanmar, Thailand and Indonesia are our maritime neighbors. So largely part of extended neighborhood. Now our relationship is driven by one, of course it is geography. So the shared geography shapes India Southeast Asia interactions, and it has shaped the relations over the ages. Apart from that, culture and history have shaped these relations, all right. So if you look at geography, it's very simple. One, Bay of Bengal or Indian Ocean links South Asia, India with Southeast Asia, plus monsoon, seasonal reversal of wind, made voyages from India to Southeast Asia possible, all right. So then you will see traders move to Southeast Asia from India. Then you will also see all the major elements of civilization in Southeast Asia, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. They also traveled from India to Southeast Asia. That's why you will see a lot of similar cultural symbolism, all right. So that's another way in which you could see geography and culture are intertwined. So that's why historically what you will see is, if you historicize this from ancient period to medieval period to modern period of history, there has been constant cultural commercial linkages between India and Southeast Asia, all right. The ancient linkages are proven by how some of the southern Indian empires, especially the Cholas, expanded their influence, including territorial influence, to Southeast Asia. All right. So the formation of, for example, Sri Vijaya Empire, or the formation of Champa. If you go to the period of Mahajanpadas, you will hear about Champa. All right. So these are all references to historical affinity between India and Southeast Asia, either the Chola expansion or the formation of Sri Vijaya Empire in Southeast Asia, or locations like Champa in Southeast Asia. They are all examples of ancient linkages. Similarly, as I said, civilization of Southeast Asia comprises of religious trends: Hinduism, Buddhism and Islam. All of them flowed from India to Southeast Asia. That's why you will see world's largest temple is in the Angkor Wat, which is in Cambodia. All right. So that's something that is very clear. Now, when we come to one aspect of history, modern aspect of history, what we will find is there is another linkage which is created, and that is the colonial rule, British colonial rule. Another linkage which develops between India and Southeast Asia. So now, wherever the British colonial rule is there, you may expect common institutional practices or a language like English being used in governance. The Britishers established Singapore as a trading post while ruling India. So you will also see that wherever the Britishers went, they either took Indians with them to work in their offices or to generally work for them. So there is also a diasporic linkage. So one is solidarity against colonialism, another is diaspora. All right. So in Southeast Asia, you will see in Singapore, for example, 8% of its population is of Indian origin. 8% of Singapore's population is of Indian origin. All right. And then in Malaysia, 9% of Malaysia's population is of Indian origin. 9% of Malaysia's population is of Indian origin. Tamil is an official language of Singapore. All right. Tamil is an official language of Singapore. Right. In Myanmar, you have around 2 million people of Indian origin. 2 million people of Indian origin in Myanmar. So you will see in these countries, Indians have contributed socially, economically as well as politically. For example, more than 7,000 Indian companies are now registered in Singapore. All right, more than 7,000 Indian companies are registered in Singapore. Or 3 presidents of Singapore have been of Indian origin. 3 presidents of Singapore have been of Indian origin. And you will also find that the current cabinet of Singapore, for example, comprises people of Indian origin, all right, including the foreign minister. All right, current foreign minister is of Indian origin. All right. So that's another thing that you will see was created through the British colonial period, diaspora. If you go in the history of Indian freedom struggle also, you will find such references. For example, Indian National Army is formed in the Malay Peninsula, and Netaji takes over the leadership of the Indian National Army here as well. So that's another historical linkage. So that's where what you will see is that while culture, civilization, history, geography are the solid foundations of India's relations, politically 20th century saw some form of divergence. So in the Cold War period, for example, you will find countries of Southeast Asia being part of NAM. All right. For example, Indonesia. Indonesia is a founding member of NAM. All right. But you will also see that in the Cold War period, largely this came under, this area became a theater. Southeast Asia became a theater of Cold War, with events like Vietnam War and formation of, before that, formation of SEATO, Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. All right, Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. So this then means that while there is cultural affinity, there is shared geography, there is some divergence in focus. Politically, there is some divergence. India moves ahead on the path of non-alignment, and Southeast Asia becomes an important theater of the Cold War. Now, in the post-Cold War period, what you will see is that this region becomes the focus of India's look east policy, all right, which is stated to be launched in 1992, and in recent times, 2014, this look east is now called Act East. All right, so our relations have consolidated over the course of last decade of 20th century and in the 21st century. All right, so that's why what we can say is that Southeast Asia is important for India from the perspective of a cultural and civilizational linkages. Why is Southeast Asia important, or what are the important aspects of their relations? Cultural and civilizational linkages, historical exchanges, shared geography, shared borders, and shared issues of security like drug trafficking, terrorism, and radicalization. So this is the content of India's interest in Southeast Asia, right? Security issues, culture, geography, history, and now you can add the substantial part of the modern day relations apart from these. So one, of course, the geography, right? It is not separated from the factors that we mentioned. Shared geography means high potential of connectivity. All right, so this is basically what would be shaping the relation in the times to come, right? Connectivity. Shared geography between India and Southeast Asia means a high potential for connectivity. Now, this also means economic activities, all right? So what would also drive and has driven India-Southeast Asia relations are economic engagements. And then we also have, apart from economic engagements, the larger geostrategic imperative of a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. All right, rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific, right? So that's what is driving the relations, and that's what would be driving the relations in the times to come. India and Southeast Asia. Now, when we talk about India and Southeast Asia, we don't take a country-wise approach. We take a regional approach, whereby we talk about India's relations with Southeast Asia through the lens of ASEAN, all right, through our relations with ASEAN. So that is something that we will try to understand. So we can say that India's relations with ASEAN, which now are referred to this year when the summit took place, we decided to refer to our relation as comprehensive, strategic partnership. All right. Now this comprehensive strategic partnership, as we have already understood, is based on, as the factors that we had mentioned earlier in the case of Southeast Asia, shared geography, shared cultural and civilizational linkages, and shared historical exchanges. All right. So that is there. The basic fundamental factors: history, geography, and culture. Right. So every relationship has a way of being talked about. Now this relationship has been nurtured in the recent times over the last 3 decades by extensive political and diplomatic engagements, which means features like summits. India ASEAN summits are a regular feature of India ASEAN relations. If you are reading current affairs, you may have come across the news of India ASEAN meeting or India ASEAN summit. 19th summit took place in 2022 November. All right. Cambodia hosted the summit. Apart from the summit, we have more than 30 dialogue mechanisms. Summit is taking place every year, but we have more than 30 dialogue mechanisms. All right, including a track 1.5 initiative called Delhi Dialogue, which started in 2009. It's a track 1.5 initiative of India and ASEAN, the Delhi Dialogue, right? Now, apart from this, what drives the relations, or what has been one of the initial drivers of relations in the era of Look East and then Act East, is economic engagements, whereby both trade and investments, all right, trade and investments between India and ASEAN has shown progress, growth, right? So on the face of it, it seems to be an important economic relation. It is also driven by India ASEAN agreement on trade in goods, meaning a free trade agreement in goods, which was signed in 2009, became effective in 2010, and it is also driven by an agreement on trade in services as well as investments, which was signed in 2014 and ratified in 2015. So again, from the perspective of numbers, growth, or from the perspective of arrangements to sustain this growth, this relationship is an important one. It's an important economic relation that we have. Now, moving forward, what we also can see is that strategic cooperation between India and Southeast Asia is also of significance, right? So one is, we can refer to long-term issues of significance as part of strategic, futuristic issue of significance as part of strategic. So security cooperation, mainly as we have seen, radicalization, drug trafficking, terrorism, and maritime security, all right, Addressing these kinds of issues would make ASEAN an important partner. Second is progressing in areas of transformation like connectivity. All right. And third is, as I said, developing a common regional approach on regional issues, which largely we can simply define as we had done previously, a common view on developing a rules based order in the Indo-Pacific. So this is what we can say to be the strategic component of this relations, either security engagements on various issues or issues like connectivity which can transform the relations economically and otherwise, or issues of regional significance, regional stability, for example seeking a rules based order for the Indo-Pacific. All right. So that's basically what India Southeast Asia relation looks like. For every relationship, this is what you need to do. You need to first find a easy way to describe it, or easy name nomenclature for the relation. So for example, we are saying that it is a comprehensive strategic partnership. Then we say that it is based on certain pillars. So some static parts are always there. Without mentioning also, you should understand that this is the part of the relation. But this is not the only relation. It is not a paper of history. So that's why all other aspects. So how is the political diplomatic engagement? So that also is understood through either there are established mechanisms like summit or more number of meetings or other dialogues. Then there is economic agenda of any relationship which revolves around trade and investments. But we also see that if those relations have any special agreements which deepen the ties. And then when we look at strategic part of any relationship, we generally are referring to security defense issues or issues of the future, all right, or other geostrategic issues. All right. Now let's then say that even beyond this, you will start developing ways of referring to a relationship by reading newspapers. जहाँ पे आप पढ़ रहे हैं तो आपको कोई quote मिल गया. So we can say that, for example, India ASEAN relations are defined by 3 C's. All right, culture, commerce, and connectivity. All right. So this is what you do. You gradually pick up the art of writing like this. First, having a simple understanding, a formula for any relationship, and then by practice, you develop your ability to articulate it. So we can say that India-ASEAN relations are based on the 3 C's, which are culture, commerce, and connectivity. Now we can also say that this relationship has evolved, as we saw that in the, for example, 20th century, the British period created newer forms of interactions. Then we had the Cold War period, where despite bonhomie or positivity between these two sides, strategic issues created divergence. All right. And then post-Cold War period. Post-Cold War period. Post-Cold War period can be defined as the evolution of India's approach from look east to act east. All right, look east to act east. Right. So UPSC also has asked a question on this particular theme, look east, act east. So that's why first thing which we'll do is we'll try to write about this relation, about this transition. चलिए लिखिए. India's relations with Southeast Asia in the contemporary times. India's relations with Southeast Asia in the contemporary times is best understood through India ASEAN ties, best understood through India ASEAN ties. The ties between India and ASEAN are driven by three C's of. The ties between India and ASEAN are driven by three C's of: culture, commerce, and connectivity. Three C's of culture, commerce, and connectivity. At the end of the Cold War, India needed to formulate a new strategy. India needed to formulate a new strategy in light of the following. A new strategy in light of the following. 1. In light of the following. 1. Collapse of the Soviet Union. Collapse of the Soviet Union meant that India had lost an important strategic and economic partner. Meant that India had lost an important strategic and economic partner. 2. The Gulf War and resultant spike in the prices of oil had further accentuated India's balance of payment crisis. India's balance of payment crisis. 3rd, India adopted economic liberalization with trade, acquiring prominent attention. In this period, the launch of Look East policy in 1992 aimed at enhancing engagements with the countries of Southeast Asia, now under the umbrella of ASEAN. While there always was a significant reserve of goodwill for India, based on cultural and civilizational affinity, the economic success of many East Asian tigers, the economic success of many East Asian tigers, as well as the project of economic integration launched by ASEAN, project of economic integration launched by ASEAN had started showing results, thus had started showing results. Thus, under the look east, while overall engagements with Southeast Asia, were to be developed, including cultural people to people, and in later phase strategic engagements, semicolon. It was the economic arena which showed the most consistent focus, and progress. By the time India announced the transformation of its look east, transformation of its look east to the Act East, policy, in 2014, the relations had achieved the following milestones. 1. India became a sectoral dialogue partner of ASEAN in 1992. And a full dialogue partner in 1996. 2. India and ASEAN institutionalized their summit level interactions. In 2002. An India ASEAN free trade agreement in goods was signed in 2009. Free trade agreement in goods was signed in 2009, and agreements on trade in services as well as investments were negotiated in this period to be signed in 2014. Next point. In 2012, India and ASEAN countries held a commemorative meeting celebrating 20 years of the relations, In this year, both sides upgraded their relationship to a strategic partnership. Paragraph change. The transformation of Look East into Act East was accompanied by the pronounced focus on deepening the engagements, as well as focus on action and implementation. In the era of Act East, the meaning of East expanded to include relations beyond Southeast Asia. The meaning of which is evident in the era of Indo-Pacific. In this period, the focus is on ASEAN centrality. However, intensification of cooperation through forums such as BIMSTEC, as well as Mekong Ganga Initiative. Connectivity is another area where further intensification of progress. Connectivity is another area where further intensification of progress is expected. Further intensification of progress is expected. Furthermore, cooperation in science and technology. Furthermore, cooperation in science and technology, especially space technology and its application, especially space technology and its application. Cyber security, digital connectivity, and cyber security, digital connectivity, and data related issues would be prominent in this regard, While changing the paragraph, while the economic area of engagement clearly outpaced cooperation in other areas in the era of Look East. Outpaced cooperation in other areas in the era of Look East. For example, trade between India and ASEAN grew by 4 folds in the first decade of Look East. Trade between India and ASEAN grew by 4-fold in the first decade of Look East. In the second decade of Look East, further deepening of trade took place. Through the signing of free trade agreements, further deepening of trade took place through the signing of free trade agreements. In the era of Act East, issues like expanding trade deficit with ASEAN, as well as regional economic integration, integration of regional value chains, integration of regional value chains, supply chain resilience, making progress in trade, in the liberalization of trade in services, are some of the challenges requiring attention. In this context, India not signing the RCEP. In this context, India not signing the RCEP in 2019. India not signing the RCEP in 2019 signaled the divergence on the issues, signaled the divergence on the issues. However, many of the ASEAN countries, along with India, are part of the US-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Such an avenue holds significance. Such an avenue holds significance in light of the issues pointed out above. Change the paragraph. Next. Both India and Southeast Asia have China as their larger neighbor. Both sides have their own complex set of relations. Both sides have their own complex set of relations with China. The Southeast Asian countries have China as their major. The Southeast Asian countries have China as their major trading partner. However, they also have strategic concerns regarding China's rise. Accompanied by assertion and aggression. The Southeast Asian countries have relied on the presence of an external power to balance the larger presence of China. Traditionally, this role has been performed by United States. However, these countries expect India to play a more active role strategically in the era of Act East. This aspect acquires greater salience. In the era of Act East, this aspect acquires greater salience. Changing the paragraph. Projects like Kaladan multimodal project, as well as the Asian Trilateral Highway project, Kaladan multimodal project as well as the Asian Trilateral Highway project were conceived in the second decade of Look East. The test of the success of Act East, would depend not only on expediting the completion of these projects, but also expansion of these projects, especially the Asian Trilateral Highway project, to include Laos, Cambodia and Vietnam, would further strengthen India's reach in the region. It is also necessary to counter and provide an alternative to China-led BRI projects. In this context, India's involvement needs to be supplemented with partnerships with Japan, Australia, and the USA. Going forward, a focus on culture, as well as people to people interactions, would aid the efforts made by governments, the efforts made by governments and governments and officials. ठीक है, this is what we needed to write on India Southeast Asia relations, specifically the evolution from look east to act east. UPSC has asked a question on this particular aspect. You may find it expedient to go and look at it and try to answer that question. All right, आप देखेंगे जाके 2013 के बाद के क्वेश्चन मैंने आपको देखने के लिए कहा हुआ है. चलिए, so now we will go to these areas. We will take out these areas of India ASEAN relations. All right, and we'll make sense of the relations through some numbers, and we'll identify some issues. Right. So if we start talking about the economic engagements between India and ASEAN, we clearly see that ASEAN is an important trading partner for India. B, this relation has displayed a growth in trade. C, this relationship also has the intent of further intensification because there are free trade agreements involved. But we also see that there may be certain issues that India faces with these partners. So with ASEAN, there are two issues in particular which India consistently wants to address. One is the trade deficit. Largely the concern is regarding goods, increasing trade deficit with ASEAN. And second is lack of progress in the implementation of services agreement by Southeast Asian countries. All right. So these are two important issues that we can identify as issues that which India would like to address at the earliest. And the third issue is the strategic geo-economic cooperation for the future. Strategic geo-economic cooperation for the future, which means trade is becoming more and more regionalized. Countries would like to trade with friendly countries or close by countries. So from a global focus on trade, we may be entering into an era where there, for the time being, there would exist a WTO-led global trading order, but also countries entering into free trade agreements or other trade agreements with preferable partners. All right. So that is also something that is for the future. India has not been part of RCEP, but India is part of IPEF, which is negotiation only, बातचीत ही हो रही है अभी. So that's basically something that we need to think of as areas of the future. Now, in very, very simple terms, it would be good if we could, have a very simple understanding of things related with ASEAN. So what we call ASEAN refers to Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It came into existence in 1967. Its secretariat is in Jakarta, Indonesia. Right now it comprises 10 member states. All right. So 10 countries of Southeast Asia are part of ASEAN. Right. East Timor is not a part of ASEAN. It's an observer as of now. And apart from this, when we talk about this region, you would increasingly hear about ASEAN led frameworks. All right, ASEAN led frameworks. Right. So ASEAN led frameworks is a reference to such institutions, dialogues, which has as one part ASEAN countries as its member, on one part ASEAN plus. All right. So such initiatives are, for example, ARF, ASEAN Regional Forum. All right. But more important one is East Asia Summit. East Asia Summit was institutionalized in 2005, and India is a member since 2005, right? Since 2005. ARF institutionalized in 1996, and India is also its member. ARF, ASEAN Regional Forum. Most important ASEAN-led frameworks, when we say that there is something called ASEAN-led framework, we are talking about these kinds of institutions. ASEAN Regional Forum, East Asia Summit. ASEAN Regional Forum has 28 participants, East Asia Summit has 8 participants. Alright? So both of them are platforms for dialogue on strategic issues regionally. Right? So both of them facilitate a dialogue on regionally relevant strategic issues, regionally important strategic issues among important stakeholders. So what is the role of ASEAN-led frameworks? Promotion of dialogue and cooperation on regionally significant strategic issues, all right, among the participating states, right? So which are ASEAN, definitely 10 ASEAN countries plus other set of countries. So here you have East Asia Summit, 10 ASEAN countries plus 8 other countries. Here you have the ARF, 28 countries, 10 ASEAN countries plus 18 other countries. All right, so this is 10 plus 8, 10 ASEAN countries, right? And this is 10 ASEAN countries plus 18 other dialogue partners. There are others also. For example, there is something called ADMM plus, all right, which is ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting plus, ASEAN Defense Minister plus other dialogue partners and their defense ministers. So ADMM plus would also be another ASEAN-led framework, ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting plus. So इनको हम कहते हैं ASEAN-led framework. And when India says ASEAN centrality is important, this is what India is supporting. That any future discussion on issues of the region should ideally take place or keep at the center ASEAN-led frameworks. All right, because they are already here. So that's what India says, right? When it says ASEAN centrality, right? So इतना आपको ASEAN के बारे में पता होना चाहिए. इसके अलावा, if you see ASEAN, its population is around 650 billion, 650 million. All right, not billion, 650 million population demography, and its economy is around 2.8 trillion. So you see, ASEAN becomes valuable once you put these numbers together. These 10 countries together have a population of nearly 650 million, and they have a combined GDP of 2.8 trillion. So this means that in the future also these countries are going to remain important. If you see, the economy is almost the size of India and the population is half that of India. So one thing is very clear, that this region, apart from China, India is the third largest supplier of labor, workers, right? So that's something unique about ASEAN. And ASEAN ultimately proposes to create an ASEAN community by leading integration along economic, political and security aspects. All right, ये aim है ASEAN का, to create an ASEAN community, to create, basically to lead to a regional integration, economically, security wise as well as politically. Economically, of course, they are in a much advanced phase. Politically and security wise, integration is not as advanced. All right, so this is ASEAN. This is something that you should remember, especially when one mentions ASEAN-led frameworks, right? Now, moving forward, this is the ASEAN which we are talking about. So we have already done a bit of writing about the relations where we have mentioned the areas of engagement. So here if you see economic ties between India and ASEAN, first of all there are certain ideas which should be very clear to you because of what we have talked about or what you may have read, that it's an important pillar of the strategic partnership between India and ASEAN. Economic ties are important pillars of the strategic ties between India and ASEAN. Second thing which should be clear to you is that economic engagements have been a focus of Look East as well as Act East, right? So one of the major components of focus of Look East was economic cooperation. In Act East also, that is one of the major focus, all right? So consistently it is an important feature from Look East to Act East. Third is that the relation is guided by, economic ties are guided by agreements, all right? So we already know this, right? Agreement on trade in goods signed in 2009, agreement on trade in services, and agreement on investments, effective since 2015. So this is the third feature of economic ties that you see. You also know that over the last 3 decades the trade has flourished, it has expanded, it has increased, right? So that's there. And you also know that along with expansion of trade, what has expanded is the trade in the deficit in trade, right? So this is something that has also happened. And apart from that, what you see is it is an important area of incoming FDI into India. It's an important source of flows of FDI into India, all right? So according to the MEA, 2000 to 2021, the FDI from Southeast Asia into India was around 115 billion US dollars. 2000 to 2021, FDI of 115 billion US dollars. So that's a high number, and if you pay some, stress your brain some more, you will realize that Singapore consistently ranks among the top 3 sources of investments in India. So most of this investment, by the way, is coming from Singapore, but it is from Southeast Asia. Similarly, in terms of outbound FDI, Indians investing in other parts, ASEAN is a prominent investment region for the Indians. And again here also, most of our investments would be in Singapore. 7,000 Indian companies, as we said, incorporated in Singapore, right? So what is the economic engagement between India and ASEAN? You already know through our discussion. The only thing is that you practice it in your writing. And now we also know what the issues are, right? So what are the issues in India in its trade with ASEAN? Number 1 is with trade deficit has expanded and it has been persistent. Number 2 is there has been a lack of progress in the implementation of services agreement, all right? So these two have to be addressed. And number 3, of course, is the larger regional futuristic agenda of economic cooperation, right? So that also has to be addressed. So what are the ways in which this is addressed? So it's a very simple suggestion, and that is reviewing the existing free trade agreements. That's the path that India has adopted, all right? India has raised the demand for the review of FTA, and both sides have agreed for the review of the FTA, all right? So through the review of the FTA, primarily India seeks to address the issues of trade deficit as well as other issues like the limitations in services agreement. And this is something that has been a consistent position of India for a very long time, right? So this is the economic arena of our engagement, right? Now the next thing that we will be looking at is strategic arena of engagement, right, which is where we will look at what constitutes the strategic arena of engagement, for which also you remember we have an idea, because this is something that we have been mentioning since the beginning. Dusra, what kind of engagement does India have in this context? What kind of engagement does India have in this context? Strategic engagement. All right. So through this we will complete our discussion of Southeast Asia. But going forward, what we'll do is we take up two issues. One is the RCEP, another is South China Sea, and both of them are example of what we can call strategic issues. One is strategically important in the arena of economy, another is strategically important for regional stability and security of the region that we are talking about, right? So please take a quick break, and after the break we continue and we try to complete Southeast Asia today. चलिए, okay, if you have come back after the break, आप कर लीजिए साइड में. If you have come back after the break, we are talking about India Southeast Asia relations. All right. Now India Southeast Asia relations are to be understood in the context of India's evolving Indo-Pacific approach, right? So all aspects of this relationship are also then important or relevant in the context of the Indo-Pacific approach. So let's do a bit of writing. जो अभी हम कर रहे थे उसको थोड़ा लिख लेते हैं. All right. Economic partnership between India and ASEAN. प्लीज़ बी क्विक अबाउट इट. लिखने के बारे में थोड़ा तेज़ रहेंगे. कभी कभी ठंड में मेंस होता है, हाथ नहीं चलता है सवेरे सवेरे, राइट? ओके, सो इकोनॉमिक ties between India and ASEAN are reflected by the growth in trade registered over the last 3 decades. Over the last 3 decades, the trade between India and ASEAN currently in 2021 stands at more than 110 billion, US dollars, stands at more than 110 billion US dollars, with a trade deficit of 16 billion US dollars, with a trade deficit of 16 billion US dollars. This has been an important feature of the trade ties. This has been an important feature of the trade ties, where while there has been expansion of trade, simultaneously there has also been a persistent concern in India on the expanding trade deficit, The trade deficit had crossed 23 billion US dollars mark. The trade deficit had crossed 23 billion US dollars mark in 2019. In this context, it is important to note that in India, manufacturers have complained that goods from Southeast Asia from Southeast Asia have received greater market access, Similar progress for Indian goods, is not evident in the ASEAN countries. India has a trade deficit individually as well with a majority of Southeast Asian countries. While the trade agreement on goods and services signify the intent to deepen these ties, India seeks mutual benefits. In the case of services specifically, in the area of movement of natural persons, the opening up has been less than satisfactory from India's perspective, in Southeast Asia. Another area of economic engagement in the form of investments, presents a positive picture, where from 2000 to 2021, cumulative FDI from Southeast Asia or ASEAN countries, better would be you write ASEAN countries, cumulative investments from FDI from ASEAN countries stands at 117.88 billion, US dollars. It is noteworthy, however, that around 115 billion US dollars of this investment, comes from Singapore. According to Indian figures, between 2019 to 2021, or 2022 March 2019 to March 2022, which is the end of year 2022, the total investments from Southeast Asia or total investments from ASEAN to India amounted to 55.5 billion. Total investments from ASEAN to India amounted to 55.5 billion. out of which 51.5 billion, out of which 51.5 billion US dollars of investments went to Singapore. In the above context, economic ties are also affected by regional trends. In this case, regionalization of trade as marked by the RCEP coming into force in 2022, as marked by the RCEP coming into force in 2022. Furthermore, efforts towards supply chain resilience including supply chain diversification for developing a China plus one alternative, presents multiple opportunities. Therefore, India needs to clearly articulate and pursue its position. The decision to review, change the paragraph, the decision to review the existing FTAs to address the issues of market access for Indian products, as well as the persistent trade deficit, along with the issue of lack of progress in services adequately. So this is economic engagement between India and ASEAN. You understand the important aspects of it, right? Now let's move towards what we call as strategic areas of cooperation. All right, on that also you can write, and we can classify it into 3 categories. The strategic issues in India-ASEAN relations. Addressing common security concerns, like drug trafficking across borders, like drug trafficking across borders, terrorism which afflicts both India and ASEAN countries, terrorism which afflicts both India and ASEAN countries, spread of radicalization, and maritime security including safety of sea lanes of communication, constitute the agenda for cooperation between the two sides, This was also highlighted in the 2017 Delhi Declaration, as well as reiterated in the recent summits. In this context, India's engagements are reflected by participation in ASEAN-led frameworks, like East Asia Summit, ARF, ADMM plus, EAMF. EAMF is Expanded ASEAN Maritime Forum. All right, जसविंदर इतनी देर से उसने लिख रखा है यहाँ पे, because he has read the current affairs. All right, so Expanded ASEAN Maritime Forum, EMF plus. All right, these are all dialogue platforms जहाँ India participate करता है. So we are only using them as examples of India's participation. Change the paragraph. In 2019, or with Singapore, right? With Singapore, changing the paragraph. With Singapore, India has special ties. Including between the armed forces. This relationship is characterized by mutual logistics support, including access to Singapore's Changi port for Indian naval vessels. Furthermore, SIMBEX, SIMBEX, all capitals, SIMBEX exercise has been a regular feature, in 2019, has been a regular feature. In 2019, India and Indonesia, as part of their strategic partnership, signed a comprehensive defense cooperation agreement. On this occasion and since then, it has been reported that Indonesia has invited India to develop maritime infrastructure at Sabang. India had provided, changing the paragraph, India had provided 25 million pesos of assistance. India had provided 25 million pesos of assistance to Philippines for combating insurgency, not counterinsurgency, for combating insurgency. Recent development on the sale of BrahMos missiles to Philippines. Recent development on the sales of BrahMos missiles to Philippines further opens up possibilities of such strategic engagements with other countries of the region. Here, Vietnam needs special emphasis. India and Vietnam share a comprehensive strategic partnership. India has also announced a series of line of credits. For defense capacity building, defense procurement to Vietnam. Vietnam's shared borders with China. A history of discord between the two neighbors. Vietnam shares borders with China. A history of discord between the two neighbors. A history of discord between the two neighbors makes and its stakes in maintaining regional stability has led to some referring to Vietnam as a key part of India's necklace of diamonds, strategy. Change the paragraph. Connectivity has the potential to transform economic security and strategic ties between the two sides. This therefore acquires long-term and strategic significance for both sides as well as future of the region in this context, as well as the future of the region. In this context, while the already in progress projects like Kaladan multimodal project and the Asian Trilateral Highway project signify the promise and potential. However, their timely completion should be the first priority. Going further, both sides have engaged in finalizing a motor vehicle agreement. As well as have discussed expansion of these projects, expansion of the Trilateral Asian Highway project, to include countries like Cambodia, Laos and Vietnam. India aims to integrate with the regional connectivity master plan of ASEAN. The regional connectivity master plan of ASEAN 2025. India became the first country to host a connectivity summit with ASEAN in 2017. India became the first country to host a connectivity summit with ASEAN in 2017. In 2015, the Prime Minister had announced $1 billion US. The Prime Minister had announced $1 billion US of line of credit to promote digital and physical connectivity projects. $1 billion US of line of credit to promote digital and physical connectivity projects in ASEAN countries. Connectivity initiatives with ASEAN acquire specific salience. Connectivity initiatives involving ASEAN countries acquires specific salience in light of India's domestic objective of developing the landlocked northeastern region, It furthers the objective of strategically deepening India-ASEAN ties in all areas. Importantly, it also is required to provide an alternative and counter the expansion of Chinese investments under the BRI. And counter the expansion of Chinese interests under the BRI. In this context, the launch of Act East Forum. By India and Japan in 2017. The launch of Act East Forum by India and Japan in 2017 signals a way forward. Abhishek says, sir, thoda slow please. Understand my dilemma also. कहाँ स्लो हैं, समझाना भी है, पढ़ाना भी है, लिखाना भी है, फिर इसको कम से कम लेक्चर तक सीमित भी रखना है, तो ये सारे ऑब्जेक्टिव कैसे पूरे होंगे? तो आपको भी थोड़ा कहीं ना कहीं तो मेरे साथ कॉम्प्रोमाइज़ करना होगा। जैसे एक कॉम्प्रोमाइज़ हो सकता है, वीडियो अवेलेबल है आपके पास, छूटने की चिंता मत कीजिए, अपनी स्पीड पे ध्यान दीजिए कि स्पीड आपकी बढ़े, क्योंकि स्पीड आपके काम आएगी, मेरे नहीं। ऑल राइट। और जहाँ कुछ छूट जाए इस प्रैक्टिस में, वहाँ वो वीडियो से सप्लीमेंट कर लो, ठीक है? अदरवाइज मुझे 6 महीने दे दो IR पढ़ाने के लिए, मैं सब पढ़ा दूंगा और सब करा भी दूंगा, राइट? वो ऐसा तो हो नहीं सकता। चलो, सो नाउ इसी में आगे अगला लिखते हैं हम, ठीक है? प्लीज चेंज द पैराग्राफ। इंडिया हैज endorsed the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific issued in 2019. India has endorsed the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific issued in 2019. Full stop. Under its own Indo-Pacific approach, India identifies, or India acknowledges rather, ASEAN centrality as one of the core tenets. India acknowledges ASEAN centrality as one of the core tenets. Both the above steps are in line with India agreeing with ASEAN's views on the centrality of ASEAN and ASEAN-led frameworks to any arrangements क्या लिखा मैंने, फिर से बताना? To any arrangements relevant to the issues prevalent in the region, including regional stability, economic engagements, as well as a rules-based order, for the Indo-Pacific. In this context, intensifying cooperation through maritime exercises, arms sales, as well as defense agreements, need to be intensified. India's cooperation with other like-minded countries with an interest in the region, other like-minded countries with an interest in the region, like the Quad partners, is important. So this is our write-up on strategic cooperation between India and ASEAN. With this, we have completed all relevant aspects of engagements with ASEAN, Southeast Asia. Now, as I said, comes out of this discussion a set of two issues where UPSC has asked question, it will ask questions, and they also help us in understanding certain long-term trends, strategic trends in the region. So one issue is RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is economic in nature but significant for the long-term future, so that's why strategic also. Another is the issues surrounding South China Sea. This is what we are going to look at. All right. So let's first take the case of RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. All right. So first of all, as you know, RCEP refers to Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, RCEP, as many people call it. Right. So as the name also suggests, it's an economic partnership. Right. So thereby, whenever you talk about agreements like comprehensive economic partnership or comprehensive economic cooperation, it simply means that it is an agreement at the core of which there is a free trade agreement. All right. But then it is more than a simple free trade agreement. All right. So a simple free trade agreement is an instrument to liberalize trade primarily by focusing on reduction of tariffs, initially to start with in the area of goods, and gradually what you will see is that free trade agreements in services also became fashionable. This is how free trade agreements evolved, primarily as an instrument to do what? To liberalize trade. By doing what? By doing something as simple as elimination of tariffs. Right? So first came free trade agreement in goods, then came free trade agreement in services. That's the first generation. Now after that, once you implement free trade agreements, you will start finding out A, their benefits, B, their negatives. So in order to accentuate their benefits and address the negatives, what you see is the next form of free trade agreements became what are called comprehensive trade agreements. All right. So be it CEPA, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement. What are they? They are FTA plus. They are free trade agreements which are package deals. All right. What package? Meaning they include both goods and services. Right. First of all, यहाँ पे आ गया अंतर that now you have one single set of agreement where both goods and services are covered. So obviously, feature of free trade agreement, which is elimination of tariff, would also be a part of economic partnership agreement. So that's there. But why is it comprehensive? Because it may include other features depending on the negotiation. It may include both goods and services. It may include not only tariff provisions but also non-tariff provisions, regulatory provisions covering range of areas: environment, labor, intellectual property rights, competition rules, rules of origin. तो क्या हुआ? ये हो गया एक complicated set of arrangement. At the core of it, it is still a free trade agreement. All right, but the difference is that it's a package deal. All right. So it includes a lot of things. So that is the nature of RCEP also. Second thing that you must understand, that all these agreements are doing what? They are creating rules of engagement. Trade would be conducted under these rules, right? So the international order currently, which is seen to be under the auspices of WTO, is also a rules-based order for trade, but this is at the highest level, all right? This is at the international level. So that is the most comprehensive articulation of the aim of liberalization of trade, by either eliminating tariff or by creating common rules, harmonizing rules, by addressing competition, by addressing contention, by resolving disputes. So that is the highest level. But now what you see is there is also regionalization of trade rules. So these trade agreements are not violating WTO, rather they are taking forward the aims and objectives of WTO on the one hand. Why? Because they would also further trade liberalization, all right? And they would not say that they would violate WTO principles. They would accord the same principles. But the thing is that just as WTO becomes more and more dysfunctional because of the logjam of different interests, countries would prefer to go towards regional trade agreements. So there is a possibility that newer trade rules may develop through regional trade agreements. So in that context, the more countries follow regional trade agreements, some people argue that this undermines the WTO, right? Because by nature, countries are now preferring more of agreements with closely knit set of countries rather than relying on larger set of rules. But if you look at closely, they are not necessarily violating the WTO, all right? In one sense, they symbolize that countries prefer dealing with each other at a smaller level rather than WTO. But on the other hand, these agreements don't violate WTO understanding, that they take it forward, all right? So ऐसा ही होता है, पहले आप ट्रेड कर रहे हैं, फिर आपने FTA किया, फिर आपने ट्रेड से फ़ायदा हुआ या नुकसान हुआ, तो आपने सीखा, फिर आपने उस ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट को और आगे और कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव बनाया. So this is evolution of how countries interact with each other on the matters of trade, right? So what RCEP is then? So RCEP is referred to as variously. First of all, its name is very clear: Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So it is referred to as a mega regional free trade agreement, all right? RCEP is a mega regional free trade agreement. Among whom? Among ASEAN and 5 of its free trade partners, all right? Among ASEAN and 5 of its free trade partners. ठीक है? Which are these 5 free trade partners? So 10 countries of ASEAN plus Australia, China, Japan, New Zealand and South Korea, or Republic of Korea as it is called, all right? So it is an agreement between 10 ASEAN countries plus 5 of its already existing free trade partners. Naming them again: Australia, China, Japan, New Zealand and South Korea, right? So then if you go into its background, the negotiations for RCEP started under the leadership of ASEAN in 2012-13, all right? 12-13, the negotiations on RCEP started. At that point in time, remember, from 2012 to 2019, we refer to RCEP as a negotiation for or proposed free trade agreement between ASEAN and 6 of its free trade partners. So initially, to start with, it was a negotiation between 10 ASEAN countries plus 6 of its free trade partners. So which was 5 we already know. Which was the 6th one? India, all right? India also was negotiating the RCEP. Now thereby what you would see is negotiations continued till 2019 in various rounds, and 2019 the agreement was finalized, and 2020 the formalities of signing it were complete, and 2022 January the RCEP was launched, All right, RCEP has been launched now. It's not no longer an agreement only. It has created now a free trade area, right, involving ASEAN plus 5 of its free trade partners. Now, if you look at this agreement, it at that point in time made sense for us to participate in its negotiations. We participated from 2012 to 2019. So obviously the question is, why did we participate? So the answer to this question is a combination of significance of RCEP plus India's own issues and interests. All right, India participated in the negotiations, A, addressing the significance of RCEP itself, plus in order to advance and safeguard its interests, right? These are the two things why India participated. Now by 2019, 4th of November 2019, India announced, and it was a last moment announcement, that it would not be signing the RCEP. The Prime Minister said that neither Gandhiji's talisman nor my conscience permits me to sign this agreement. So this is one way of stating it, that India is not signing. And the explanation which was given was that A, the final RCEP does not reflect the original spirit in which the negotiations had started. All right. And 2, more importantly, that many of the core concerns of India were not met by the final draft of RCEP, that India's core concerns were not met. All right. And thereby we also need to understand, why did India, how do we justify India not signing the agreement? All right, UPSC mein yahi hai. When India signs, we justify it. When India does not sign, we justify it, right? So as bureaucrat also, एक चीफ मिनिस्टर कहेगा कि लैपटॉप बेचो, लैपटॉप बांटो, एक चीफ मिनिस्टर कहेगा कि लैपटॉप मत बांटो, तो दोनों को आप जस्टिफाई करेंगे. ये ब्यूरोक्रेट का काम होता है ना, ये ब्यूरोक्रेट का रोल होता है. सो आई हैड मेट मेंबर ऑफ अ यूपीएससी फ्यू ईयर्स बैक. तो उन्होंने एक बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग कहानी सुनाई थी कि इन टिल 1979 द एग्जामिनेशन वाज इन इंग्लिश मीडियम. आई एम रिकाउंटिंग इट टू द बेस्ट ऑफ माई एबिलिटी. 1979 अंडर Morarji Bhai Desai as Prime Minister, it was decided that the exam be open to vernacular mediums, right? So before that, the bureaucracy would argue that it would lead to dilution of the quality. All right, तो पहले ब्यूरोक्रेसी अपोज करेगी भाई कि एग्जाम को ऐसे नहीं करो. जब प्रधानमंत्री ने ये कहा कि आपको ये करना है, तो उसी ब्यूरोक्रेसी ने भी जस्टिफाई किया और बहुत ब्यूटीफुली लिखा कि इट वुड लीड टू डेमोक्रेटाइजेशन ऑफ एग्जामिनेशन, इंक्लूजन एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा. और उसे 1971 के बाद से आप देखेंगे कि एग्जामिनेशन इज कंडक्टेड इन इंग्लिश बट ऑल्सो इन अदर लैंग्वेजेस. ऑल राइट, सो दैट इज योर job as a bureaucrat. All the best to you. All right. Now, the RCEP then was not signed, so obviously there is India's position why we did not sign it, which we will understand. On the second hand, there is also the observation of scholars who primarily are commenting on economy that India may have missed out on an opportunity, right? That India's decision signals protectionism. India itself is known for protectionism, at least in the West. Now this decision also shows that India is has still not moved away from protectionism. All right. And then this argument is something that we keep in mind because UPSC sometimes says critically analyze. So that's why we need to know both sides of the argument. Critical analysis का मतलब होता है कि show the holistic picture, show both sides of the argument. इसका मतलब बुराई करना नहीं होता है. All right. Critical engagement का मतलब होता है engaging deeply, right? So then if that is the case, so we have to in UPSC's process point out, so if the criticism is there, the potential was there, India not signed it, what are the options available to India in this case? What are the scenarios that you can see? India has not signed the RCEP. यही तो मैं कह रहा हूँ ना. 2019 India did not sign the RCEP. देखो सुधांशु, मैंने जब शुरुआत की, हिंदी में बोल देता हूँ मैं, तो मैंने कहा कि RCEP 5 फ्री ट्रेड पार्टनर आसियान के बीच का एग्रीमेंट है. 2022 में लॉन्च हो गया, ये भी बता दिया। उसके बाद मैंने ये भी कहा, तो थोड़ा आदत ये भी डेवलप करो और वीडियो भी देखना, कि भाई आरसीईपी इनिशियली टू बिगिन विथ इन्वॉल्व निगोशिएशंस बिटवीन 10 कंट्रीज एंड 6 ऑफ इट्स फ्री ट्रेड पार्टनर्स। समझ में आई बात? तो कभी कभी तुम्हारे क्वेश्चन का ओरिएंटेशन मैं नहीं समझ पाता हूँ कि यू सेड दिस और यू सेड दैट, ध्यान से सुनो, ठीक है? उसके बाद लिखवा भी दूंगा मैं, तो उसको पढ़ भी लेना। चलो, it would not always be possible to always explain in the language which is comfortable for you, right? I hope you understand this limitation in the class. So then this is something that the last task is, what should India do going into the future? ठीक है? So let's start writing about this. ठीक है? Keeping in mind जो डिस्कस किया हमने ना, वो डिस्कशन को के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में, राइट? प्लीज स्टार्ट राइटिंग। Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is a regional free trade agreement negotiated between ASEAN and its 6 free trade partners, ASEAN and its 6 free trade partners, from 2012 to 2019. From 2012 to 2019. The agreement was finalized in 2019 and it finally led to the launch of the RCEP free trade area, in January 2022. In January 2022. Now it comprises 15 countries, as India decided not to sign, the final agreement in 2019, not to sign the final agreement in 2019. India's decision, change the paragraph, India's decision to engage in the negotiations of RCEP, can be explained by the following. One, the RCEP involved some of the most important trading and strategic partners. Some of the most important trading and strategic partners of India. Especially the ASEAN. Countries. Two, the agreement held significance, the negotiations held significance as it involved countries with a population of nearly 3 billion, with a population of nearly 3 billion, accounting for 30% of global GDP, accounting for 30% of global GDP. Currently, ब्रैकेट में लिखना, currently the RCEP comprises 30% of global population. The RCEP currently comprises 30% of global population with 2.2 billion people residing in the 15 member countries, It also represents 30% of global GDP. It also represents 30% of global GDP. Therefore, it is also world's largest free trade area. Therefore, it is also world's largest free trade area in terms of size of the economies. In terms of size of the economies. Next point. The RCEP negotiation marked an occasion to shape the rules of engagement, in economic arena, in the larger Indo-Pacific, Participation allowed India to make an effort in shaping these rules, Next point. Shaping these rules. Next point. Since these agreements involved large trading partners, including ASEAN, it also potentially provided an occasion to address the issues of trade deficit, and to safeguard India's interests in areas like pharmaceuticals and textiles, Change the paragraph. In November 2019, India announced its decision of not signing the finalized version of RCEP. As explanation, it was pointed out, as explanation, it was pointed out that the final version of the agreement did not reflect the original spirit. Final version of the agreement did not reflect the original spirit of the negotiations, and it also left some of the core concerns of India, unaddressed. The following can be pointed as the factors shaping India's decision. The following can be stated as the factors shaping India's decision. Shikha is asking negotiations started in. Shikha, negotiations started in 2012. Okay. One. While the RCEP negotiations featured a high demand for reduction and elimination of tariffs on goods, covering more than 90% of India's traded goods, On the other hand, similar enthusiasm on the liberalization of services was not evident. Two, concerns regarding trade deficit persisted as India had a trade deficit with 11 of the 16 participants. India had a trade deficit with 11 of the 16 participants. Specifically, the concerns that the agreement would give China an unfettered access to India's markets, leading to further widening of the deficit, remained a key concern. Next point, remained a key concern. Next point. India's demands for an import surge safeguard mechanism, an import surge safeguard mechanism as well as its demands for stringent rules of origin, as well as its demands for a stringent rules of origin criteria was also not satisfactorily addressed, Next, the RCEP involved negotiations in many newer areas. The RCEP involved negotiations in many newer areas. Negotiations in many newer areas like e-commerce, this it was pointed out by many would have prejudiced India's traditional position at not discussing these issues at the WTO, Next, the negotiations involved provisions on intellectual property rights. Negotiations on protection of intellectual property rights. Many had pointed out that newer trade negotiations involving advanced economies advocate stringent IPR provisions going beyond the simple provisions of TRIPS, provision of TRIPS. Thus, it would have been particularly detrimental for sectors like generic pharma. Next, domestic opposition from manufacturers as well as dairy and agricultural sector are also instrumental in the final decision of India, were also instrumental in the final decision of India. Change the paragraph. In the aftermath of this decision, many experts pointed out that it would send a wrong signal to the international community and create a protectionist image of India and create a protectionist image for India. B, it was pointed out that by not participating in the RCEP, India would miss out. By not participating in the RCEP, India would miss out on the opportunity of integrating itself with regional value chains, and C, many opined that signing such agreements incentivize and push domestic reforms, By not signing, it was argued, India missed out on the opportunity for domestic economic reforms. Okay. Now, so then, as I said, going forward, क्या करना चाहिए? So let's learn about that. In the context of trade with ASEAN, or in the a report of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Commerce, titled Trade with ASEAN had pointed out the following. One, free trade agreements are important for the creation of trade. Free trade agreements are important for the creation of trade as well as expansion of trade. 2. However, the free trade agreements of the past, prioritized goods over services. Free trade agreements of the past prioritized goods over services. Next point. These agreements in most cases led to an increase in imports, more than exports. Thus, the resultant trade deficit with most of the free trade partners. Next point. Okay, just keep it, just leave it there. This is a report of 2017. All right, so this basically shows India's position, how thinking has been evolving. Right, keeping the above in mind, going forward, और ये याद रखना हर फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में क्या होना चाहिए. राइट, गोइंग फॉरवर्ड, the following is the suggested way. 1. Working within the existing free trade agreements. To address issues like trade deficit and barriers to market access. Two, next point. Expediting the negotiations for and finalizing free trade agreements with important trading partners such as the recent CEPA with UAE, but also agreements with European Union and Australia. Next point. Domestic reforms and strengthening of manufacturing sector, especially in the MSME, to make them globally competitive. Next point. engaging with the emerging negotiations and frameworks, emerging negotiations as frameworks, such as the IPEF, such as the IPEF. Now, beyond the points, simply write as conclusion, the doors for joining the RCEP remain open for India. The doors for joining the RCEP remain open for India, as it was one of the original negotiators, as it was one of the original negotiators. And other members are keen to have India in the RCEP, given the size of its market, given the size of its market. For this to happen, addressing the core concerns of India, is an onus that lies with the RCEP member countries, is an onus which lies with the RCEP member countries. Right? So we have covered till RCEP, so the job becomes easier. Next class, when we begin, we will start moving away from Southeast Asia through South China Sea to now towards East Asia, Japan, Sea of Japan, all right, East Sea. So that is something that we will be doing, as we had made the framework in the previous class कि इंडो पैसिफिक का क्या मतलब है, हम कहाँ तक जा रहे हैं. ठीक है, ASEAN complete, Southeast Asia complete. You can read your content for Myanmar, you can read your content for Vietnam, Singapore भी included है ना, बहुत सारी चीज़ें पढ़ने का शौक हो पढ़ो. But next, South China Sea and then relations with Japan. That would be the major order of the next lectures. Thank you very much for your time and attention.